Anyway, you're listening to 1075 Tonight with me, Tom Lane. We're talking about something slightly different this evening. Veganism, I believe, is the term I'm going to use. And how do you want to introduce yourself this morning?
My name is Connor Anderson. I'm a vegan animal liberation activist. I became vegan around 2 years ago after being a meat eater and a dairy and egg consumer for 17 years. Recently, not long after going vegan, I became an activist as well, which means I take to the streets on a regular basis in an attempt to educate the masses about the realities of the meat, dairy and egg industries, about the kind of needless cruelty that they're paying for when you go into the supermarket, when you go into the restaurant, because there's a process in between the neatly wrapped package you pick up in the supermarket and the animal that was alive beforehand. There's a stage in between that you don't get to see on TV very often, if at all. So my purpose is to shed some light on that in-between process, to make people aware of the needless suffering that they're paying for, and to get them to think about the choices they're making every day, specifically the victims of those choices, the most innocent beings on this planet who have never done a thing wrong to us, who we treat worse than some of the most horrible human beings to have ever lived, and their only crime was being born a particular species.
In terms of just talking about this area, obviously you're based in Havering.
I'm based in Gidea Park.
How is the kind of vegan movement in Havering?
With regards to the number of vegans, I know there are an awful lot of them. There are different groups around on social media, Havering Vegans, for example, with a lot of people in it. The problem we have is there aren't enough vegan activists. Now, we hold weekly events on Friday evenings, which I'm sure we'll go into a little bit more later on.
Yeah.
And sometimes we get maybe 4 people turn up. On a good day, we could get 10 to 12 people turn up. But the key thing is there are an awful lot of vegans, nowhere near enough activists. We're not going to change the world just by being vegan. We're going to change the world by actively getting out there, speaking up for the animals, how we would want to be spoken for if we were in their position. And unfortunately, there aren't enough people doing that at the moment.
What do you say to people, we saw obviously last week with the interview with Piers Morgan about the idea of activism being kind of a threatening thing, kind of from his point of view? Well, obviously the word activist is quite, I'd say that it's an aggressive word. What do you say to people that maybe say that?
Activism is not necessarily aggressive. There are different forms of activism, of course. You use the word threatening. Threatening to who exactly? We need to look at the perspective here. Who are the ones really being threatened? Who are the ones really being oppressed on a daily basis? We murder on this planet around 3,000 animals every single second, just because we like the way they taste, just because we want to wear their skin on our bodies, just because we want to use them for pointless, unscientific medical experiments. So, aggressive to who exactly? I would say that it's only aggressive to It's only perceived as aggressive by the people whose livelihoods are at stake, of course. We don't want anyone to go out of business, of course. We just want the abuse to stop. We just want the animals to be left alone.
And do you think that's something that's mediated? Because I imagine the average Joe does have a perception that the vegan people are quite aggressive because they want this to stop, and they'll go about it by going to other people's farms, etc., slaughterhouses, etc., to make their point.
Well, when you really begin to understand the extent to which this is going on, with the vast majority of people, not just in this country but all over the planet, paying for, without even thinking about it, the needless suffering of all these innocent beings, it's hard not to get aggressive at times. It's hard not to get angry, and I'll be the first to admit that sometimes I can get a little bit aggressive, perhaps more than I intend to. But our message is a message of peace. All we want is a world where no innocent sentient being has to live in fear, has to be harmed for such trivial reasons as we like the way they taste, or we like the way their skin would look on our bodies.
And what do you say to people? I get these questions. I've recently been converted to vegan, if converted is the right word. Say to people, they say to me, why are you a vegan and not a vegetarian, for example?
Unfortunately, vegetarianism is not an animal-friendly lifestyle. Now, if I may, I'll just explain the dairy and egg industries a little bit. So with the dairy industry, the first thing to understand is that cows are mammals like us. So they produce milk for the same reason that human women do. That's to feed their young. It also means that they'll only produce milk after they've given birth to a calf. Now, the dairy industry is like every other industry on this planet. They exist to make profit, to make money, so they can't afford to wait for the cows to become pregnant in the natural way. So they will be forcibly impregnated via artificial insemination. They will have bull semen injected into their cervix. That gets them pregnant. That starts the milk flow. And then once they've given birth to the calf, obviously the industry can't have these little calves drinking up the milk that they would rather sell to you instead. So the calves will be taken away from their mothers either immediately after birth or sometimes within the first few days. Now, male calves can't produce milk, they can't have babies, so they're deemed worthless to the industry. So they'll be either shot at birth, or sometimes they'll be sent to the veal industry to be slaughtered at a very young age for tender meat. Now, the ironic thing is, most people in this country are opposed to the veal trade, and yet what they don't realise is that by consuming dairy, you're still supporting that industry, because that's where the veal calves are coming from in the first place. As for the female calves, they will be raised to live the same horrible lives as their mothers, forcibly impregnated multiple times throughout their lives, having their babies stolen from them at birth, having their udders hooked up to machines 3 times a day to suck the milk out of them. And then, after 4 to 6 years, when their bodies become so exhausted that they can no longer produce any more milk, they'll be sent to slaughter themselves so that one final profit can be made from their fragile, exhausted bodies. Now, naturally, a cow can live to 25, 30 years in the wild, sometimes even longer. In the dairy industry, it takes them just 4 to 6 years for them to become so exhausted they often can't even walk, they can't have any more babies, can't produce any more milk, and around half of all beef in the UK comes from the dairy industry. So unfortunately, even if you're not consuming meat directly, if you're consuming dairy, you're still supporting the meat industry. Now, as for eggs, with the male chicks, similar to the male calves, they're considered worthless to the industry. Now, chickens raised for egg production are of a different breed to those raised for meat. So male chicks brought into the egg industry are disposed of at less than a day old in the quickest, most cost-effective manner. This will be to either throw them into grinders, gas them to death, or suffocate them to death in huge plastic bags. Now, this is completely legal, not just in the UK, but in most countries throughout the world, and it's fully supported by corporations. Perhaps corporation isn't the right word, by charities such as the RSPCA, who claim to care about animal well-being. Now, why is that? Now, also for the female chicks who are then exploited over a number of years for their eggs, they are forced to lay far more than is natural to them. Now, naturally, a hen should be laying 10 to 15 eggs a year as a rough average. In the egg industry, sometimes they're forced to lay up to 300 eggs a year, which puts an awful lot of strain on their bodies. When they're laying eggs, it deprives them of essential nutrients like calcium, and obviously laying eggs in such large quantities, it can result in things such as osteoporosis, and around half of all hens break a bone at some point during their lives as a result of that. A lot of people seem to think that if you buy free-range, cage-free, organic eggs, that's somehow better. But to give an example to show that this isn't the case, here in the UK, a free-range egg farmer can legally house up to 9 hens per square metre of space, and that would meet the legal definition for free-range. So it just shows that these terms exist for one reason alone, and that's to make you, the consumer, feel better about the choices you're making. It doesn't mean a thing for the animals. The only way you can truly be living an ethical, animal-friendly lifestyle is to leave animal products off your plate altogether. And it's so much easier than most people seem to think it is. These days you can go into any supermarket, most restaurants, and find vegan alternatives that taste just as good. I mean, off the top of my head, I could probably name 7 or 8 plant-based milk alternatives. There's rice milk, soy milk, oat milk, sunflower milk, hazelnut milk, rice milk, hemp milk, cashew milk. There are probably loads of others that I've forgotten, but just try a few of those. Sometimes if you go for supermarket's own brand ones, they cost exactly the same as the cow's milk option. So it's just a simple switch. I promise you'll find one that you like, and you'll no longer be paying for these cows to be bred into the existence for the sole purpose of being exploited for their milk. No, you'll be no longer paying for these cows to have their calves stolen from them at birth, which, by the way, is incredibly traumatic for them, just like it would be for any human woman who has her baby stolen from her. The cows will cry out for days. They will keep returning to the last place where they saw their last saw their calves, and this is a process that's repeated for the 4 to 6 years that they're kept alive.
I've got plenty Magic Little Mix on Psalm 107.5. We're still talking about veganism with Connor, my guest, for the next half an hour or so on this Monday evening. I guess I would quite like to talk about your story, really, and how you kind of turned to veganism.
Yeah, of course. So it started a couple of years ago. I was studying A-level geography at the time, and we did a lesson where we were learning about the environmental impact of animal agriculture, how detrimental it is to the planet. For those of you that aren't aware, animal agriculture is the leading cause of most environmental issues we face on this planet today, such as deforestation, ocean dead zones, species extinction. If you'd like to find out a bit more about that, there's a brilliant documentary called Cowspiracy you can find. I'll tell you a bit more about that. But anyway, we did a few lessons on this in geography, and funnily enough, at the same time, a good friend of mine who used to sit next to me in those classes, he'd just gone vegan at the time. And we didn't really speak about the animal rights side of things as much, but we did talk about the health side of things, and I could physically see on a regular basis how much healthier he was looking. So that got me thinking. I knew that we weren't consuming meat and animal products because we had to. It wasn't out of necessity. I'd seen proof of that with how healthier my friend was becoming. And I also knew about the damage that it was doing to the planet. So I did more research. And then when I started to see the footage of what was happening to these animals, they were being forced inside slaughterhouses against their will, being hung upside down and having knives shoved into their throats, or being gassed to death, dairy cows having their calves stolen from them, as I've already said, male chicks being thrown into grinders. I thought to myself, what's the reason why we're doing this? I know we're not doing it for our health, we're not doing it out of necessity, and I know that this is destroying the planet, but obviously nobody likes to come to terms with the fact that the way they've been living for an awfully long time is not morally justifiable. So I tried so hard to come up with a good reason in my head why we were doing this. If it wasn't for our health, if it wasn't for the planet, it must be for something other than taste. Because surely that wouldn't justify it, would it? 2 years later, I'm still yet to hear a good reason why we're doing this to these innocent beings. As I said earlier, they've never done a thing wrong to us, and yet we treat them worse than some of the most horrible human beings to have ever lived, and their only crime was being born a particular species. And when I came to terms with this, I went vegan. I became an activist shortly afterwards because I realised that simply being vegan alone was not going to change the world. Simply choosing not to participate in, a massacre was not going to stop it from happening. So as I was saying, I now take to the streets on a regular basis. I do a lot of stuff online as well, just to spread the message in any way I can. And I'm fully aware that most people aren't bad people, and anyone who is reasonable will, when finding out about the truth, will want to change as well, just like I did. So I'm just seeking to look for those people who are willing to listen and hopefully get them to make the same choice that I've made.
Why do you think that veganism isn't more popular than it is?
It's difficult to say. I mean, it's been happening for a long time, what we've been doing to animals. That's not to say that it's ethical or morally justifiable by any means. I mean, there are a lot of things that have been happening for a very long time, will happen for a very long time, that aren't necessarily acceptable. But we've been conditioned from such a young age to believe that paying for animals to be killed for our own selfish purposes is acceptable. And there's no judgment here at all. I fully accept that if we've been told something enough times, we will believe that it's true, regardless of how ridiculous it seems now. I mean, now I think about it, the idea of taking the milk from another species, for example, the fact that I ever thought that this was a natural part of the human diet seems utterly ridiculous. But to people that have been told this for such a long time, it will take a while to undo. It does take a while to unlearn these things, but it is possible, and that is why veganism is rising. Obviously, nowhere near quickly enough where the animals are concerned, but I do believe that no injustice can live forever, so someday in the future there will be a time when all animals have the inherent freedom that they deserve, in the same way that one day all racism, sexism, homophobia will cease to exist. It's going to take a long time. If we can't even treat each other with respect, how can we expect people to treat animals with respect? But it is going to happen, and my goal is simply to bring that day forward as much as I possibly can.
Do you think is going through I want to say boom period in the UK in terms of people are becoming more aware of veganism? There seems to be more vegans than ever. I think I read something about a local supermarket selling their own brand of vegan products. Or are you concerned that maybe this is being seen as a bit of a fad?
Compassion is not a fad. And to be honest, maybe if some people do decide to try veganism for a month, for like, I don't know, maybe they saw a celebrity they like do it. Once you get started, you start to understand more about what's been going on. You see, when I went vegan, I wasn't as clued up on a lot of things as I am now. I said that I knew a bit about the environmental aspects of animal agriculture, but I wasn't completely aware of it. But when you go vegan, you begin to interact more with others who have the same ideas. You begin to learn a lot more. So I'm not at all concerned that this is a fad that will die out, because when you understand what's truly going on, no reasonable person would ever want to go back to the way they were living before. The blinders, the hypothetical blinders, have been taken off. You see the world in a different way. You see on a daily basis the kind of needless suffering that people are paying for, and you would never go back. So I'm not at all concerned. I as far as I'm concerned, veganism is going to keep rising. The quicker the better, of course, and that's what we as activists are hoping to achieve. But we are going to see a vegan planet one day. Perhaps not in our lifetimes, but it is going to happen. I have no doubts about that whatsoever.
In terms of, I guess, stereotypical views of people that are vegan, what would you say to people that say, oh, you know, vegans, they don't have any energy, they only eat cardboard, to these kind of stereotypes that I've heard so far since I've been a vegan?
Try telling that to David Hay, Hector Bellerin, Jermaine Defoe. I could go on. In fact, in the last Olympics, the only male weightlifter to represent the US was vegan. There are more and more vegans breaking world records on a daily basis. This idea that vegans are weak and have no energy, I don't know where this came from, but it's utterly ridiculous. On a personal level, I can say that since going vegan, my energy, my stamina has improved drastically. I can get up in the mornings so much more easily. Like I said, I'm out on the streets on a regular basis trying to spread the message. This is something I couldn't have done before. I'm not to say I was in terrible health before, but I didn't have anywhere near the amount of energy, stamina that I have now. So if anyone tells you that veganism is like unhealthy, anyone tells you that you'll be weak, you'll have less stamina as a vegan, don't listen to them. They haven't got a clue what they're talking about.
I'm afraid I'll play some more music now. We are talking about veganism. So we have got Connor, my guest, in the studio with us. You kind of do, well, I suppose you do bits and bobs around the country, but talk to me about some of the stuff that has been going on in Havering.
Okay, so our group is called Havering Vegan Action. We were formed in, I think it was March last year, and since then we've been holding regular events. Our most regular event is called an Earthlings Experience. This is held every Friday evening outside the McDonald's on South Street from 7 to 9 p.m. And the idea is to show footage, graphic footage from inside slaughterhouses, from inside factory farms to the public. As I said, most people are reasonable people, so when they see this footage and when they give us a chance to explain it and when they really come to terms with what's happening, most people are going to want to change. So we show them this footage, we interact with them, we hand out information as well, and we've had an awful lot of success doing this. Not only have we created a lot of new vegans this way, I mean, like after each event, sometimes we get people messaging our page on Facebook, for example, saying, oh, you've really opened my eyes, thank you so much. We've also had vegans going past us who have chosen to become activists after seeing us, because as I was saying earlier, we need more activists. I remember reading somewhere quite a while ago that if every vegan on this planet persuaded just 2 other people to go vegan every year and then got them to do the same thing, it would take, I think, only 4 years to create an entirely vegan planet. So that shows how close we could potentially be. It's just a case of everyone getting out there doing our bit. As I said, every Friday evening from 7 to 9 p.m. outside McDonald's on South Street in Romford. We also hold occasional events in Hornchurch, Upminster, for example, and a few months back during the fur season, we were doing a lot of outreach with regards to the fur trade as well, raising awareness about that and gathering signatures for a petition that was going around at the time. So if anyone's listening to this is interested in getting in touch, just look up Havering Vegan Action on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. We're on there. Just drop us a message, tell us you'd like to get interested. There's no signing up process or anything. Anyone's welcome to come along and help us spread the message.
Is there a lot of options in terms of eateries that sell vegan products?
With regards to Romford, or just in general?
in the Havering area, really.
In the Havering area, well, we're lucky enough to have a few chain restaurants that do serve vegan options. Off the top of my head, we have a Harvester, ZZ, Pizza Express, Pizza Hut. Did I mention Toby Carvery? I'm not sure.
Do they do stuff in the retailery as well?
Yeah, I was about to mention the retailery, actually. They do all kinds of vegan options. They do vegan burgers, vegan cakes, even like a vegan curry, all that kind of thing. So, even places like Nando's do vegan options these days, which is pretty incredible considering they're perceived as like a chicken restaurant. So these days, as I was saying earlier, it's so easy to be vegan. Most restaurants will do at least one option these days. In fact, it's got to the point now where if there's just one or two options, I'm a little bit disappointed, which if you speak to people that have been vegan 10, 20 years, that's pretty incredible, because back in those days, perhaps going into a restaurant having the vegan option just meant a salad, whereas these days it's like, oh, they only have 3 types of soy milk. That's a tad disappointing. So it just shows how quickly things are changing. As I said, we're quite lucky in Havering to have several different chain restaurants that have these options. As far as I'm aware, there isn't any exclusively vegan cafes or restaurants, but it's only a matter of time because they are popping up elsewhere as well.
My understanding, and more importantly for me, I think Guinness has gone vegan, which is great.
Well, I'm not a drinker, so I wouldn't know. But if that's your thing, we've got you covered. That's a great thing. Whatever you like, we've got it vegan.
Well, the first thing I asked.
Yeah, there's even like vegan beef jerky these days, I think. I don't know what's going on with people's taste buds, but if that's what you like, we've got you covered.
Just kind of one final thing. What would you like to say to people that are maybe on the fence about becoming a vegan? Because we are running short of time.
Speak to us. As I said, our group is called Havering Vegan Action. Feel free to drop us a message at any time, ask us any questions. Also, I'm going to recommend one particular website. It's called challenge22.com. So you sign up online, it's completely free, and you'll receive 22 days of free support from an assigned mentor. So that will be things like recipes, nutritional information, products recommendations, and all the advice is adapted to suit you. So if there was something in particular you think you'd miss, or maybe a particular nutritional concern you'd have, they will help you find a way around that. But just speak to people who are experienced, speak to people who know what they're talking about, and they will help you through it. Give it a bit of time, and I'm sure a few months down the line you'd say the exact same things that I say, that being vegan is the best thing you've ever done. Your only regret is not doing it sooner. That's something I say all the time, and pretty much every other vegan I know always says these things. It's a wonderful thing. You're living a life of compassion. You're no longer paying for so many innocent beings to be needlessly murdered for the sake of diet, and you get so many great health and environmental benefits out of it as well. I mean, what is the excuse against that? What is the excuse against trying to cause the least amount of harm possible?
Fantastic. Connor, thank you very much for coming into the studio this evening. Great to speak to you. And as I say, if you become vegan, you can still drink Guinness as well, which is my selling.
All that matters.
Well, that's pretty much